What if your habits, moods, and mindset aren't really yours, but borrowed from what you've been consuming? Welcome to this new episode of A Voice Notes from Samio. Today, I wanted to get into how you are what you consume physically, mentally, and emotionally. And this is something I really want to talk about today because this has been on my mind a lot recently as I've made some shifts in my life and really been kind of reflecting on what I consume in different areas. And I've seen how it's altered things and made changes in my own mindset and lifestyle. So maybe if you've been feeling stagnant, a little bit lost, maybe even if you're just feeling like you're not quite where you want to be, or maybe even if you're just not feeling how you want to feel, these could be some of the reasons, or it could be related. But let's break down how what you let in shapes who you become. Number one is people. Basically, your vibe is a reflection of your tribe. Cheesy, but true. And I always like to think of that famous saying, or I don't know who came up with it, but it's that idea that you are a sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. I think that did get a little bit caught up in that hustle bro culture at one point. And so I think taking ideas like that with a grain of salt is always a good idea. But the way I look at it is who you spend the most time with, or whose ideas you consume the most, because I actually do think what you are consuming online and all that stuff has a big knock-on effect on this as well, but we will get to that later on. But who you essentially spend the most time with, and those people in your inner circle, whether it's friends, family, co-workers, whoever they may be, really can have an effect on how you think, feel, and basically see the world in general. And oftentimes we're not even aware of it. This is why it can be a really good one to think about, because sometimes when we're not in a place we want to be, or maybe we've fallen into a certain type of headspace, it can be a reflection of who we are spending a lot of time with, even the type of conversations we had. Essentially, we are tribal beings, right? Whether we think we are or not, to some level, we're all trying to fit in and we all want to be accepted by the tribe. And in this instance, that's our inner circle, whoever you do tend to spend the most time with. So there are certain areas where initially it might not seem obvious, but over time, certain types of ideas and ways of thinking do start to merge. And this isn't always necessarily a bad thing. It's the way we get on in society, right? It's the way we make close friendships and bonds. We find the common ground and we kind of form those ideas and thoughts together. And I think there was even some scientific study. I always bring these things up and then never get my receipts, but I did hear this once. I think there was a scientific study where people who spend a lot of time together can even start to have the same laugh. And I'm sure you've experienced this with a close friend or a family member or even a partner, where you start to pick up the same mannerisms and you might even have in-jokes with each other. And so that's obviously a very simple way of looking at it. But just as much as these can be positive things, they can actually really affect how we show up in the world. And the way people are around you can really affect your habits. A really prominent example of this for me, where I feel like I don't want to say a personality shift because I've always had the same personality, but I do believe that different people or different groups can bring out different parts of your personality. I remember the transition of going from high school to college. So if you're in the US, in the UK, after 16, generally you can leave high school and you go to a separate college. And it's like the period between 16 and 18 before you go to university. So I left high school and I went across the city to a completely separate college that no one from my high school went to. I met completely different people. And it was like overnight, I just stepped into a different side of me because all of a sudden I felt like I could express myself more. Simple examples would be, I went from never wearing my hair out in high school. Of course, this can also be a bit of a coming of age thing, right? Because you're at that age where, peer pressure can be strong and you tend to be more insecure when you're younger. But for the most part, never really wore my afro out in school. It was always tied back, and style-wise would kind of conform to the general, what was in fashion, what most of my peers were wearing. I think at some point I even was in a group of friends where we would dress the same when we weren't wearing our school uniform. And then when I went to this college with these completely different people who didn't know anything about me prior, and who were each very different, very quirky. I entered a very, very quirky friendship group, and we each had our own style and likes. And all of a sudden, it just felt very acceptable to kind of step in to some of my quirkiness. And this is when I really started to get a taste for dabbling with my personal style and experimenting. I started dyeing my hair crazy colors. I wore my afro out all of the time. And so that's an example of where the way I showed up changed. Obviously, it's very much in like a personal style, self-expression way, but just in the change of environment and those people that were in my immediate circle, having that change there really allowed me to show up in a different way. And so different people can really bring different things out of you. I think sometimes, especially maybe if you're someone who wants to do something a bit different, or you have different ideas about life than the people you spend the most time with, it can really be hard to break free and step into that, because you can be kind of going against the status quo. And it's not always that the people around you in your immediate circle aren't supportive. It's just that they might not understand the things you want or the things that you want to do. And so that's when I think I will get onto the next point of online and social media. But seeking out that environment online can also be really helpful. I do think it's so important to have in-person connections as well. That's like beyond valuable. But I think that's when it can be really helpful to tap in to different spaces and different communities, whether it's online or even just meeting groups and stuff in real life, depending on what's available in your area, to tap into more of those things so you can really step into that thing that you want to step into. And those things can be helpful because obviously it's not always feasible to just get like a whole new friendship group, nor do you need to. It's not about everyone thinking the same or being the same or acting the same. But I think if there is a particular, I don't know, a vibe or energy where you might even feel like sometimes it can be quite negative, even if there are people in your life that you love, or they might not encourage you in the same way, or you might not even feel like you can just express yourself freely. That's when I think it's really important to just be aware of it and think about how you can expand your circle or spend time with other people, or maybe even just put boundaries in place so that you're not giving so much of your energy to certain people that are maybe not putting you in the right headspace. And the people you're around the most can affect so many things, everything from how you view beauty standards to how you show up to fitness, to your political views. And it is very interesting to see when you do start to shift and change who you're around. Whilst there's always going to be essences of who you are at heart, it is really important to be mindful of who maybe inspires you and who makes you feel good, and who is actually dragging you down and maybe negative, and maybe sometimes influencing you with a view of the world that isn't necessarily good. And so I think it's really important to think about how you want to be as a person, like how you want to show up in life. What do you want from life? And are the people that you're directly spending your most time with, how are they affecting that, either positively or negatively? And of course, there are plenty of scenarios where it's not always feasible to get away from people or remove them from your life unless that feels right for you. But I think it's more about implementing ways that you can kind of limit that exposure to those people and spending less time with them if they are having that negative impact on your life. Essentially, the people you spend the most time with set the standard for what is normal in your world. And so that's why it can be really hard to break free from certain habits and situations. Say, for example, if you're someone who wants to quit smoking, but everyone around you smokes, it's not that it's impossible. It's just going to be a lot harder than if you were surrounded by people who are really health conscious and don't smoke and kind of see it as disgusting. You're going to kind of feel more of a pressure to maybe conform to not doing that, or at least not doing that around them, which then can sort of aid you to kick that habit. That's just like a really random example, but this can go for so many areas. And so sometimes we need to be aware when people around us are enabling certain behaviors. Essentially, for the most part, people want you to be like them, whether they're aware of it or not. There's safety and comfort of having that familiarity. It's something we all have within us. We want people to share similar habits, share similar interests. Of course, you're always going to have differences, but it can almost be quite scary when someone in our group decides to change or do something different. And it can be harder for you to have that mindset shift or change those habits when people in your immediate circle are kind of stuck in certain ways. A good example would be if you're in a group where there's always drama, you become part of the drama. No doubt you will get dragged into that drama. It can be from anything small to anything big. But I think when we have that awareness of how the people in our lives are really having that knock-on effect of our overall thoughts, moods, values, mindset, it can really give us some food for thought and think about some of the boundaries we might need to put in place or some of the relationships we maybe need to change a little bit. Number 2 is social media. And I feel like this leads on perfectly because, if you don't have new people to tap into and you're trying to form better habits, shift your mindset, online can be a great place to go. However, I know it can't be the be all and end all. And also you have to be really careful because online in particular, it's really easy to fall into echo chambers and go down rabbit holes where a view that could be quite, let's say, tame could quickly become extreme. And especially now with the way algorithms are, we get flooded more and more of the same type of content. So much so to the point that you could easily start to think that everybody thinks the same. You see these types of things all the time with elections and things. It's really easy for people to only see content of their own political leaning. So then it's easy to think that everybody thinks the same way. But step outside of that in the real world and then see the results of certain elections that happen. And then you realize that, oh, okay, there's actually a lot of people that think the exact opposite to how I do. And my point with this is whether you're being fed good or bad content, and I'm using air quotation marks there because it's all subjective, you need to really think about how what you are consuming is affecting you, because essentially that's what you become. And even if the overall message of what you are consuming online is meant to be positive, it can still leave you feeling a certain type of way. Because even being aware of how what you are consuming the most is making you feel is really important, because it might not always be good. And I'm not saying block out any negativity. You can never ever see anything bad. But I think when we get stuck in the echo chamber of social media, certain things can rile up certain emotions within us. And being kind of mindful of that is important because it's easy to get sucked in. And especially with something like social media, it becomes very habitual. You pick up your phone, you have a scroll, and you can tend to consume the same type of content. And immediately it might not always be obvious, but over time you can see the way it seeps into your subconscious and how it shows up in the way you think. I've had it before where I've watched stuff that hasn't necessarily been bad, but it's kind of got me obviously thinking about stuff in the back of my mind, and I've had restless sleep over it. And, sometimes we do need to think about things. We do need to think about whether it's problems in the world, whether it's, things we need to change, whether it's things in our own life that have been highlighted. But I think when we're having this on a daily basis all the time, if it's making our mind work overtime when it doesn't always need to, we're allowed to just live life and just be humans and chill sometimes. Like that is okay as well. I think being aware of this is really helpful because we can be giving ourselves unnecessary stress. And not only that, but we are literally rewiring our brains to think a certain way. And we have to realize that our social media, like what we consume, because we consume so much of it. And I'm being very broad here. You might not even have social media, but I'd say a lot of us, most people watching and listening, consume a lot of social media. And that ultimately what you consume becomes your worldview. And I think it is very interesting when you kind of step outside of that and you step outside of your friendship zone, social groups, family groups, and speak to people outside of that. And actually, people can have very different views and there's very different ways of thinking, which obviously can be a mix of good or bad. And again, a lot of it can be subjective. But the way that this can affect how we show up in the world is quite scary. I know we all will have heard of like the likes of the Andrew Tate effect. Obviously, Adolescence, the show, did a great example of portraying that kind of like online incel culture. And obviously that's one extreme, but that is how it starts. It can be very insidious. And I'm not saying that just because you go down a rabbit hole of a certain thing, you're going to have some sort of extremist views. And obviously that is a very extreme example, but that essentially is a prime example of how you become what you consume. And obviously this can be to a much lesser effect. But I think one of the main easiest ways to combat this is to get offline occasionally, which I know I preach about this a lot, but as someone who is online speaking to you right now, I am a big believer in, living your real life, enjoying that. And that's why I make these episodes essentially as reminders for both you and myself to tap into our full potential. And by that, I just mean living your best life, whatever that means for you. That could be a simple, relaxed, chilled life. That could be big and ambitious and bold, but essentially there's so much more to life than what's going on online. It's like we have these extra separate lives online, but sometimes we have to go outside and touch some grass, which I know you might be thinking is super, super obvious, but I think because as a culture now, we are so attached to our devices and the online world, and we do kind of have these online lives. It's really important to sometimes step out of that echo chamber and realize how much what we are consuming really shapes us. And for the times we are online, because let's face it, being online can be fun, like otherwise we wouldn't do it. That's why we all like to scroll on our phone and go on TikTok or read articles on Substack or whatever it may be. It's the age-old advice that you will have heard loads of times, but it's essentially training your algorithm. Your algorithm will feed you what you interact with, whether it's positively or negatively. If you watch the thing, whether you enjoy it or not, it will feed you more of it because all it wants is to keep your attention. So tapping into more of the things that make you feel good, that are more aligned with who you actually want to be. For me, I always mention the gym. She's back with the gym. For me, I like learning my calisthenics things. So my algorithm loves feeding me calisthenics stuff now. They're way too advanced, most of the things, for what I can do. But it is inspiring and it makes me feel good. And I like to save the techniques that I see that pop up on my TikTok. And so it's little things like that. And so that's what I want to become. So that's what I'm feeding myself. So I'm training my algorithm. If you want to send me down a calisthenics rabbit hole, you can do that. Will I ever get there? Who knows? Follow along. Find out next time on Samio's calisthenics journey. We will see what happens. Right, enough of social media because she wobbles on about that a lot. Number 3 is general media. I guess it is very similar, but we are talking TV, the news, the things we watch. And I'm also going to drop in here really quickly because I think this kind of pertains to what I talked about with social media and political views and all of that kind of stuff. But the news, if you are watching a lot of like fear-based content, and again, I'm not going to be one of these people who's like, don't watch the news, it's bad vibes. If you want to watch the news, babes, watch the news, but just do it to a level that feels good for you because there is a lot of information out there and you don't necessarily need to know what is going on everywhere in the world all the time, every day, every minute. Maybe you do if it's for your job, but if it's not for your job and it's stressing you out, you can't fix all the problems in the world all at once. It's good to know what's going on, but, ease up a little bit. And again, that can really get into your head because the world can seem really scary, really horrible if we only consume that kind of fear-based stuff all the time, because obviously with the news, it feeds you the negative headlines. If you consume that all the time, it is going to make you afraid of the world. It's going to make you afraid of people. And obviously we need to be cautious and it's good to have our wits about us and know what's going on. But we also don't need to have anxiety every day when we're walking down the street because of all the things that we're feeding into our brain. And so it's going to be different for everyone. Your tolerance to taking in that information might be very different to someone else. But essentially what you're consuming there is going to have such an effect on your mood and how you see the world. And then this goes on to like TV and stuff like that. There was a time that people used to joke. I mean, it's still kind of a thing, but it got to the point where everything on Netflix was a true crime. And I know we enjoy a true crime occasionally, but I had to just stop watching them. I was like, this is like morbid fascination now. And I'm not saying I'm never going to watch a true crime documentary again, but I was like, this is too much. For me personally, it wasn't nice. I mean, obviously it's not nice, but I was like, I don't want this as my form of entertainment. And I'm someone who can watch horror films. I don't particularly find them scary, or, I can watch gore and things like that. But I still don't necessarily need that in the back of my mind as I'm going to sleep, in my subconscious, because I do notice like the knock-on effects of the type of dreams I have. And again, how it can affect how you think about things. Because as someone who grew up watching a lot of horror movies, especially like things like Final Destination, I have a weird, unnecessary fear of freak accidents. And I believe that's because I consumed too much of that stuff. And I think about all the crazy things that could happen, which is not good. And so I laugh about it now, but it's really important to be mindful of these things, because sometimes you just need some joyful, happy, light-hearted entertainment. And on the other side of things, if you're only ever consuming stuff that's like super superficial and, just, you know what I'm talking about, like the trash TV, like I love a good, what's it called? How have I forgot the name? Selling Sunset. But if you only watch that, you would have such a warped view of life. And no shade to that show, because I really enjoy it, by the way. Do you get what I'm saying here? And in that sense, whilst it's not necessarily negative, well, there is a lot of arguing actually. Well, whilst it might not make you feel bad, or it's not scary, or it's not making you fear the world, it can also do the opposite, where you think, okay, well, now I need a £20 million mansion. If you can afford that, fair play. You go for it. You get the bag, girl. Get the mansion. But also realizing that that isn't most people's realities, and it's okay that you don't have those things, because if it might be giving you FOMO, I don't know. I'm waffling on now, but my point is, general media is also something to be aware of. Just like with anything, too much of a good thing can also be a bad thing, but essentially you do you. I just want to add, I'm not being all holier than thou with watching TV. I love watching TV. I love a good binge watching session of a show every now and again. But I also realize if I watch too much of a certain type of genre, I need to like rein it in a little bit, especially if I've watched a lot of heavy stuff. Mix it up, because it can really seep into your subconscious and affect how you're seeing things. Number 4 is environment. And this can be everything from your home to your workspace. Obviously, how much control you have over this depends who you live with, whether you own the space, whether you rent the space. With work, obviously you can't just you can't just go into your office and just start moving things around. I don't know, maybe you can. Maybe you own the office. Then you go ahead, you paint that office neon green if you like. But in general, there's certain types of parameters of what you can do in certain environments. However, they can really affect your mindset and your mood. So sometimes it's not always just being able to change the environment like you might be able to do with your home or your room or wherever you may reside. But it might be that you're able to get out of that environment a little bit more when you're aware of how it's affecting you. So first, talking about the home space, I touched on this in my previous episode, and it's something I'm really big on, because I'm not going to lie, it's something I struggle with myself. I am someone who can be messy. I don't want to call myself a messy person, because I don't want to identify with her, even though she haunts me every day. But I can dabble in the messiness, let's say, but I know it's not good for me. So I am someone who knows that I have to take extra attention with that, and I have to give myself tidying up time, because I am like a tornado when I'm leaving the house, trying on 5 different blazers with different blouses to get the combination I want to wear. And am I doing it 5 minutes before leaving the house? Sometimes. So being aware of that for me, I'm realizing the knock-on effect of how a messy environment literally leaves me with a messy brain. I just give myself that dedicated time to tidy up, which I think is a normal thing anyway in life. As adults, we have to tidy up, unfortunately, unless you have a housekeeper. A girl can dream. And it might seem obvious, but I think sometimes we can actually become numb to it, and we can be living in an environment that can actually be really not great for us, and we can just kind of be ignoring the red flags, let's say. I spoke in my last episode of how my husband and I have like we're on a mission now to like get some DIY jobs done that we've needed to get done. Because I noticed for me personally, and for my husband as well, to be fair, how that was actually affecting our mood. And then you essentially become this person who is like somewhat less respecting of your space. Because I know for me, for example, when we had a lot of DIY going on and we literally had tools lay everywhere, I just kind of put tidying up further down on the list. So then I'd kind of come in and like I'd dump stuff on the breakfast bar because I'd be like, well, it's a mess over there. So what's this extra bit of mess? And so I started even showing up as a person that I don't want to show up as and that I don't identify with. I see myself as a person who's pretty house proud. I like my house to look nice aesthetically. And I mean it in a realistic sense, not having to be like a showroom. But I just realized I was becoming disrespectful to my own house, essentially. And it was a knock-on effect of the environment. So it was kind of like going full circle. And so since like being a bit more on it, like clearing up the DIY project that we were doing, starting a new DIY project, and just being a little bit more mindful of it and realizing how it affects both of our moods and how we show up in our space and how we actually treat our home has been really interesting and also helpful to kind of like shift some of that energy and take action. And then it has a knock-on effect. And on the flip side of that, in terms of the environment, because I know in certain scenarios, you might not be in a place where you're able to change things if that's what's kind of affecting your mindset. However, it may be that you can take more time out of your environment. And obviously, this could be the case for work. Obviously, you can't just maybe get up in the middle of your working day, but whether it's, on a lunch break, if your environment at work isn't great and you don't like it, like rather than staying there or staying in the work canteen or whatever it is, could you go for a walk? Can you step outside? Can you even just go and sit in your car? I had a friend who used to do that. And sometimes she would voice note me on her lunch and she would sit in her car because she was like, I like the people at my work, but I just need a little bit of a time out from them. And so I just sit in my car. For her, it just was like a reset and she'd feel relaxed and she'd eat her lunch, would decompress in her car and then go back into the work environment with just like a bit of a refreshed energy. And this is like a sub point on this one that I wanted to add, because I think especially if you are an artist or a creative or just someone who has to come up with ideas, getting out of your environment can be so helpful. I had a perfect example of this the other day. I was trying to think of content. I was almost overwhelmed with ideas, but then also didn't have ideas at the same time. It was a bit of a double-edged sword. And I was going around in circles, procrastinating until the cows came home. And in the end, I was like, you know what? I need to take my dog for a walk anyway. I'll take him for a walk and then I'll get back to work afterwards. As soon as I was out of the house, I was scrambling to grab my phone to write down ideas because they were just flowing to me and I was just on a walk. I actually came up with the idea to talk about this because I was like, oh my gosh, of course, this is something I keep talking about with friends and I've had this conversation a lot. I was like, this is a perfect episode to discuss because clearly I'm waffling on. I have a lot to say, but in my environment, this just didn't come to my brain. And I really think it's that case of if you are consuming stagnant energy, you're likely going to come up with stagnant ideas because that's what I felt like. It was almost like nothing was flowing until I just got out and just got some fresh air. And I wasn't even going out to try and get ideas or think of things, but just stepping away from my environment and just taking a time out. The ideas just like naturally started to flow. And I was like, I should have known anytime I go for a run or go for a walk, basically just leave the house, it can be very helpful. And so, especially if you're someone who works from home or you work for yourself, getting outside, full stop, can be very, very helpful because talking about consuming things, it's like you're breathing in that fresh air. You might be able to view some nature, even if you're in a city or you can just walk down a street. There's usually different things to see and spark ideas and just help give you that refreshed energy, whether it's giving yourself new ideas, uplifting your mood, or trying to shift your mindset. Number 5 is food. Quite literally, we've all heard it before. You are what you eat. And as much as we don't like to hear this one, it's kind of true. Obviously, it's not like you eat the junk food and you become junk. However, there is definitely a gut-mind connection. And without even the science stuff, we all know how it feels if we've been consuming a lot of shit. We kind of feel like it. Let's be real. Your energy levels, focus, and mood are fueled by food. The funny thing is, as I am recording this, I'm recording this at a weird time for me, and it's in the evening, which I don't usually do. And I am hungry because this is my food time. And as I'm saying all these things, I'm like, yes, my energy is being affected. I'm starting to feel tired. My focus is going. Have I said some of the same lines 3 times in a row? Maybe. And so I'm proving my own point here. And if we're not fueling ourselves right over long periods of time, be it days, weeks, months, sometimes for some people it can even be years, it's going to have such a knock on effect to our mood, our mindset, how we show up. It can almost make you a different person in some ways, like quite literally. I think about the periods when I eat better. It has a knock on effect to how I can exercise because I have more energy levels. And I think, again, with all of this, it is balance. I'm not going to lie, I love a takeout. Like, people do not know about this about me. I love a good takeout. I love to eat out. That's quite evident. I'm posting meals out on my social media all the time, but I do really balance it well with eating really well at home, like a lot of home cooked meals, because I know if I only ate the burger, I would feel like crap. And so if you see it in a way of energy, if you want to feel energized, eat the food that will give you that energy. And I'm not going to go on too much about food because this is not a nutrition podcast, nor am I qualified to give nutritional advice. But I know if you're maybe someone who's new to cooking, it can be hard, it can be overwhelming, and people automatically see health as like salad and boring. And no, it does absolutely not need to be that. It can be so tasty and delicious. I am big into cooking. I'm big into eating. I just love food. But you can make it something really fun that you experiment with and try different things. And it can also be really simple as well. But overall, my point of this one is just being really aware of that mind-body connection when it comes to food. And maybe if you've not been feeling great and your mood's low and your energy's low, it could be connected to food. And so it's just really good to be aware of that. And I wanted to add on to this one and add alcohol, which doesn't apply to everyone because I know not everyone drinks. I am someone who does drink. However, this is something for me I have like been very mindful of in like recent years in particular, because in my 20s, like your girl liked to party, okay? No, I didn't drink all the time, but I definitely had periods where I did love a good night out. And don't get me wrong, your girl likes it occasionally, but it doesn't even always have to involve alcohol. And as someone who does enjoy to drink, I also really enjoy not to drink, and like for long periods. I really enjoy having like months off and things like that. And I notice for me, when I may be like drinking too much for me, that can really have such a knock-on effect on my mood and energy levels. And for me, whilst I do enjoy it, I'm mindful of when I consume it. And I think this one is really important to be mindful of because you might not even realize, because I think a lot of people think the main negative impact, we all know that it's not necessarily healthy for you, but I think in terms of like the immediate effects, I think most people think, oh, like it's just the hangover. But anxiety is real. And for me, it comes up. I just can have low mood for like, it can spread into the week. And essentially, alcohol is a depressant. So whilst it can be really fun, if you're consuming too much of it too regularly, you're not really giving your body the chance to recover and kind of, again, this is not scientific here. So take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, but you're not really having time to kind of re-raise your own dopamine levels from it. I'm sure I did hear something like that on a podcast once. Don't quote me on it though. If you are someone who drinks a lot, let's say, I know for some people they drink like a few times a week, you might feel fine, but it could be having more of a knock-on effect on your mood and your mindset than you realize. And especially if you've done it for a long, long time, you might not even realize how different you could feel without it. And I'm not preaching to anyone here. Like, you do you if you feel good in your choices. Like I said, your girl likes a wine. I'm not going to whine about you enjoying your wine. But I am just saying it is one to be aware of, because I've noticed over the years from drinking less and taking like extended breaks from it when I feel I need to, it's been really, really helpful. And when I dabble, I dabble. And when I don't, I also enjoy not, because life can be just as fun without it. And number 6, my final point, is your mental diet. You are what you tell yourself. What you tell yourself is a form of consumption, and negative self-talk is like perpetual junk food for the mind, let's say. Obviously, we're all going to have negative thoughts pop up once in a while. That is completely normal. But if you are feeding that talk, that dialogue to yourself all the time on a daily basis, then it's really going to have a knock-on effect on you. You might even be watching this and kind of like nodding along, because oftentimes, if you aren't, for example, confident, there's probably something in there, a part of you that's telling yourself why you shouldn't be, or why you're not good enough, or whatever it is. And so being really aware of the thoughts that we're consuming, even if they're our own thoughts. And I think all the other things I've mentioned can obviously have a knock-on effect on those thoughts, especially the people who are around, the media, the social media that we consume. But being very mindful of that dialogue can be very helpful, because often we don't realize how much that can seep into our daily thought process and even the way we think about things. Because if you're constantly going around with this negative dialogue of yourself, then it's essentially going to form your beliefs, which will then even affect how people around you interact with you, how you approach things, and it can really go in such a cycle. And maybe if you're someone who's been stuck in that, you might be all too familiar with this. And I think it can even become such a habit sometimes that for some people, they don't even realize they're doing it anymore. Like that's just how life is. But I think when we realize that we are not our thoughts, you're allowed to have negative thoughts without acting on them. It's like me with my Final Destination freak accident thoughts that come into my head. It doesn't mean that that is truth. And the same goes for if a negative thought pops into your head about yourself, it doesn't mean that that thing is true. But the more you keep telling it to yourself, you will end up believing it. But the first step is being aware of these thoughts, realizing that you are not your thoughts, and realizing that you can actually do something to change it. And so when we're aware of these patterns, we can start to kind of challenge them. I know a lot of people say affirmations, and don't get me wrong, I'm big on affirmations. Look into Louise Hay. She is great with her affirmations. One of my favorite ever is I love and approve of myself. But I do feel like if you are someone who is just like absolutely hating on yourself every day, it's going to be a bit of a leap to go from saying, I hate myself, I'm horrible, to saying, I love myself. So I think this is where stepping stones need to come in place. We need some stepping stone little nuggets to consume along the way, shall we say. And so rather than just doing like a full on 180, and if you can do that, great, go for it. But if you struggle with that, I think just starting by challenging those thoughts, and it can be as simple as being like, is it true? Now you might think straight away, yeah, it is true. I know it's true because this. But even then challenging that, but is that really true? And this might go a bit deep. You might even want to get journaling on this. It's like a little bit of self-therapy. But actually, when you really start to challenge it, it's kind of telling that voice in your head, you're being stupid. Back to the voice. Back at your voice. Just shut up. Because you're actually holding me back here, and I want to go live a nice life, okay? So can we zip it? But it does take training and it does take time. But the more you do it, you can see how it shifts your energy. I like to do it when I walk into a space. If I'm feeling a little bit nervous, I like to have a little bit of a little pep talk to myself. I hype myself up in my head. It might seem crazy. It might seem woo-woo delulu, and maybe it is, but you know what? I'm telling you, it works. And the amount of times, like my energy then, when I've like done my little hype myself up, my little, it's like I'm Rocky about to go into the ring. I'm just, I'm getting pumped. It really does do something to my energy that shifts my energy, and I become more confident, and people react to me differently because I've not just kind of walked in, skulking in and feeling all nervous and scared. And don't get me wrong, sometimes you can still feel the nerves or whatever it is. But I think just reminding yourself, being your own little hype man, essentially, can be really helpful. So when you're consuming those nuggets of negativity, being aware of it, nipping it in the bud, and challenging the narrative. So that's it. That's all I've got for you for today's episode. These are just some of the things that I think is super important to be aware of because they can actually be rewiring your brain over time. And so if we want to shift that mindset, shift that energy, step into who we want to become and just feel better physically, mentally, emotionally, these are some things to be aware of. They're things I like to remind myself of and have helped me as I've shifted some of the things over the past months, years, and so on. So hopefully it could give you some food for thought and help you in some way too. So that's it. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like wherever you are listening. Leave it a 5-star rating and review. It helps more than you would know. If you enjoyed this episode, please screenshot it and share it on your stories. Tag me at Samio Ronalda and at Voice Notes from Samio. I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting your ear off as always, and I will speak to you next time.